everyone. Welcome to this week's Tanzu Tuesdays. It still cracks me up just listening to Paul's intro recording of me. So yeah, basically next week I don't have the specific talk details, but we have Hananio Sorella and David Tillman, and they will be presenting next week on Tanzu Tuesdays. That will end up on tanzu.tv/tt if you all want to look at it later when I get that. So yeah, basically, if you haven't been here before, every week, pretty much at 12 p.m. Pacific time, we have a stream here for Tanzu Tuesdays, and we have someone talking about some interesting topic, giving a demo, etc. And we then put that on YouTube. So if you want to see some more previous stuff, again, go to tanzu.tv/tt, or you can go to the YouTube, which is VMware Tanzu. And I'm kind of curious, we are looking into also streaming on YouTube, and just I'm curious whether people prefer YouTube, if they prefer Twitch, or if you don't care. So if you have opinions, please put something in the comments. And if you're watching this after the fact, send me like a Twitter message to Tiffany Faye J. So yeah, thanks. So Amber, welcome to Tanzu Tuesdays. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, so I'm based out of Chicago. I came here originally working out of the Pivotal office, and now at VMware, stayed in the same place. So
nice. Yeah, I just actually went into my first VMware and not Pivotal office like a week ago. It was kind of weird. Like they hadn't started opening up yet, but I was borrowing a chair to see how it is.
Oh wow, yeah. Which office are you closest to?
Bellevue, Washington.
Oh cool, yeah.
Yeah, there was the Seattle Pivotal office, but I guess some nice things come to an end.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to being in the office and being around coworkers again. But
yeah, I haven't done that yet. Like, so the first time I actually saw any of my coworkers was last month, was when I was in California, and I got to meet two of my coworkers because I started March 30th during the pandemic. So I haven't actually like worked in an office, so it's been kind of interesting since I'm used to being in an office. This is my first like remote thing going on, and it'll be nice when there's actually people around, but I'm not looking forward to the commute to Bellevue in order to make that happen.
Oh yeah, that in Chicago I can relate. It's buses and trains, or biking if you choose to do so. It's a trip, but I don't know.
Oh, you can actually bike it? Yeah, I would. It would take me, I don't even know how many. It would take me so long to get there if I biked.
Yeah, I visited Seattle actually not too long ago, but I was surprised at how much the land is surrounded by water, and like how hard it might be to get between neighborhoods. So I think Chicago, we're kind of like a longer city, and we have a lot of trails, and it's like one lakeshore. But
yeah, it's been a while since I've been to Chicago. Like, let's see, I don't know, 2012, 13, maybe earlier. I don't remember exactly, but it's been a while.
Okay, yeah. I mean, love to have you out here. I think we still have an office on Merchandise Smart, which is like on the river, and it's really beautiful.
Maybe one of our Spring One tours when we start actually having them in locations, will be there. Speaking of, for anyone listening, we have Spring One happening in the first week of September. It's virtual. You can just go to spring1.io and sign up there, and I'm pretty sure it's free. So lots of Spring and Kubernetes and related things. So yeah, want to tell us a little bit about like what you do?
Yeah, I guess my official role is Senior Solutions Architect. I work with Tanzu Application Services. So my organization, we work with customers to help enable them on all sorts of Tanzu products, working with like TAS, TKG, and pretty much all stages of their life cycle with our products. So helping them get installed to going in for day 2 operations and targeting areas that they might, need a little extra help with. So a consulting role in a lot of ways. But I think, yeah, it's been like a great experience in, learning all sorts of ways that customers interact with the platform and how we can also better our products. Slight caveat, I'm actually on a rotation. So it's been about 2 months working with the RMO TKG release team. They've been amazing to work with, but my rotation is coming to an end pretty soon and I'll be back on the solutions architect work. So yeah.
How long is your rotation?
It's a little under 3 months. We're just ending at the end of the quarter. Yeah, it's been a great experience.
That's cool, like doing something different than what you normally do for a little while.
Yeah, release engineering, completely different than my original day job, but learning so much about our products and like so much work that it takes to kind of put together a release and make sure that things are good to go. It's been great.
That's awesome. Well, I will let you kick off now and do your talk. So
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Going into presentation mode. Please let me know if you can or can't see this presentation. But to start off, just going to introduce my title, talking about how do we monitor availability in different ways. And in this case, looking at our error budget burn rate. And this whole presentation is in the context of Tanzu Observability by Wavefront. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Tanzu products, but also practices around SRE and how we're working with clients to make sure that we're able to monitor availability. I also want to make a quick disclaimer that I am using VMware templated slides. It does stay confidential, but this is not confidential material. So I just wanted to put that out there before I start. So with that, I'm going to go on to the beginning of this presentation. So I kind of give a little context actually around what Tanzu Platform Services is, but I also wanted to give context into where did this work come from and what is the beginning of the story that I'm going to try and tell throughout our presentation. So I mentioned that I'm in Tanzu Platform Services, and our org is, again, working with customers, working with Tanzu products, and how do we make our customers both like self-sufficient and successful on our products. So looking back, like I believe April 2020, I was on an engagement that we called Platform Autopilot, and this is an engagement where we actually went full in managing a platform for a customer. Normally, we're a little bit more kind of like pairing and guiding and setting our customer up to work on their own. In this case, it was more of like a full management engagement where we're being the platform engineers. We were working with our customer, Samba Safety. Awesome customer, really enjoyed working with them through that time and was on this engagement for about 8 or 9 months maintaining their platform. So going through like just getting their foundations set up, in this case, we were working with Tanzu Application Service or TAS. We wanted to make sure that as platform engineers, we were, managing their platform in a way that was involving SRE practices because our end goal is we're trying to deliver a platform that is available to our users, in this case, developers. So we really worked at, developing a sort of SRE practice that would allow us to both, monitor the state of our system, but also alert us when something might be going wrong. So kind of with that kind of setting as our base, the rest of this presentation is going to build out how did we define our solution? How did we, build out a system that both monitored and alerted everything they were doing on TAS in a way that was productive for us to kind of know what was going on, but also make sure that we were maintaining availability in a way that was useful to them. So I'm going to give a little background around SRE, just so I can kind of level set what I mean when I'm talking about availability and SRE practices. So just some basics in SRE and for terminology. We have SLAs, or a service level indicator, and this is essentially looking at, what are we measuring? What is something really important to my user that I want to make sure that I'm keeping track of? That brings us next to a SLO, or a service level objective. And this is looking at, okay, I have my SLI, What level do I want to deliver performance on this SLI for? What are my users going to be comfortable with? And then that brings me to my third point, error budget. So this is looking at, okay, I have an SLO. What happens if I breach it? And how much time, how much downtime, how much, error can we tolerate before we actually breach our SLO? And there's a fourth point I didn't include here because we didn't actually work with it, but there's a term called service level agreement that is an SLA. This is generally a form of an SLO, but it's legally binding, or it's like an agreement where there is, like a hard line where, the business expects you to achieve it. So I see these a lot in industry as well, but we didn't work with that through the process of just defining a practice to begin with. So I won't be talking about SLAs in this presentation. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into these terms because they're going to come up a lot through this presentation. So I talked about a service level indicator. So when I'm talking about that in terms of this customer, we wanted SLIs for availability. So we really wanted to target things that were important to our customers and really defined, like, this is the boundary of what I'm responsible for on this platform. And this is also something that's important to my users. So kind of the intersection of those two traits. So some really common SLIs actually for, let's say, Tanzu Application Service involve CF push availability, which is my ability to use, this name is a bit deprecated, but Cloud Foundry for TAS, my ability to push workloads to our platform. This is really important for developers because they're constantly pushing changes for their applications and expecting that to be successful as they continue to develop their tools. We also have application availability. So as a developer, I might be deploying an application with Tanzu Application Service. We expect that if I deploy an application, it will be accessible and it will have good uptime. So we wanted to look at these two SLIs and start to build our SRE practice off of them. So now I'm going to go to our SLOs. So as a team, we determined that, okay, we're going to work with CF push availability and application availability. So here's where to define what level of availability do we want to achieve. In this case, we are working with 2 nines or 99% for CF push availability. And I'll go a little more into how we define those, but just for example purposes, let's say I have CF push availability as an SLI. For my SLO, I would say that if I'm performing, let's say 100 CF push operations, I'm expecting that 99% of them will be successful. So moving on to application availability now, we're seeing 2.5 nines. That's a little different. Now, if we're performing, let's say 1,000 requests to an application on our platform, we're going to expect that 995 of them are successful. So both of these are some sort of, exact workflow that a developer might be experiencing, both pushing their workload, checking on an application, and then this is the level of success that we're assuming that they're going to be comfortable with and we're defining as our SLO. This brings me to my third topic. So going a little bit deeper into what an error budget mean in this context. For CF push availability, this would mean our inverse of our SLO. So to maintain a 99% SLO, we can only tolerate 1 failed CF push, out of our 100 attempts. Application availability, that means out of 1,000 attempts, we can only tolerate 5 failures. So, we're just looking at what is my error that I can, deal with before I actually breach my SLO. So this brings into another important topic of how do I actually determine, my error budgets and my SLOs for my SLIs. And this is where it gets kind of between like a science and an art of, okay, I'm working with my users, what will make them happy and comfortable with my service, but also what will mean that I'm able to actually maintain the service and not spend too much, but still kind of hit that point where my users are happy. So it's really trying to figure out do I just want to have a platform with fault tolerance, or do I really care more about having those 5 nines and investing in automatic failover? And in this whole range, what will my users actually care about? Like I make the comment here, well, 4 versus 40 minutes of CF push failure in, let's say, a 28-day window really matter to my users? Maybe not. So it's really like taking a look at what is my infrastructure, and then, what can my users stand? So let's say in our case, we had a platform with fault tolerance. So we set a 99% SLO and an error budget of 7 hours just to start out. This doesn't mean that it's set in stone. So if we start getting feedback from users that they're unhappy with the amount of downtime they're experiencing, that brings us to another conversation of, okay, what do I need to invest to get it maybe to 40 minutes of downtime and then 3 nines? And that's a conversation you have with your users, with the business side of things. And, you kind of just iterate on what works for you. And the whole point of this is to make your users happy, to make your life easier, and also have something you can deliver to business stakeholders and say, this is how we're performing, this is what we're expecting, and kind of like having a data-driven approach to running a platform. So now that I've kind of gone over the initial steps of like, what do we want and how do we measure it and what do we even measure, I'm gonna go now into what did we actually do to get that data to start building out our SRE monitoring system. So, where do our metrics come from? First off, we started with CF push metrics. For this situation, we had a Tanzu Application Tanzu Application Service Foundation, and we deployed the HealthWatch TAS tile, TAS SLI exporter. And pretty much this exporter just does a CF push API call every 5 minutes, and it's getting data that way. So if it fails, it notes that, if it's successful, it's collecting those metrics. For application availability metrics, we actually deployed a black box exporter and a separate management cluster. And this exporter probed some Canary application that was deployed on the foundation, and this is how we got our application availability metrics. So now we have our metrics. How do we get those to Tanzu Observability? So pretty much we deployed a Telegraph instance in our management cluster. This Telegraph would scrape our, this should be TAS SLI exporter, and also scraped our black box exporter. Took those metrics, would push them to a Wavefront proxy, and then that would push it to the actual Tanzu Observability instance, which is kind of like the endpoint for where we want all of our metrics to be, so we can go ahead and start doing visualization. And just kind of a quick summary of what the whole metrics data flow would look like, starting from, okay, where are these metrics coming from, all the way to, okay, now we're at a place where we can actually visualize them. So as I've alluded, our next step is data visualization. So kind of just a little glimpse of what working in Tanzu Observability looks like. You start out with metrics. So you might be able to define a source or the exact metric name and look for it that way. So this is where you'd start out just to make sure that your metrics are actually getting to the system. So once you have your metrics in, pretty much defining queries to build charts, because the whole point is I'm going to build charts in a dashboard and eventually alerting, so I have visualization of everything that's going on in my system. So for our purposes and for our client, we wanted to work with a 28-day rolling window. I'm going to take a quick side note on why a 28-day rolling window. First off, for it to be rolling means that I'm looking at like a set of time. And as this time progresses, I am just looking at like, what is my data in this window of time? So eventually, let's say I had an outage, and as time keeps moving on, I am eventually going to not have this outage within my window. And this is how we kind of average out. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, and it'll make more sense throughout this presentation. But if I just had an outage, I'm not going to want to, introduce anything that could cause another outage until my rolling window is passed. And I'm now in a state where I've had a large window of just plain old uptime, and I'm able to take that risk again, because over our window, we're just looking at like kind of averaged out, what is our consumption of our error budget been? If you're working with something that's a little more static, like each month my window resets, you might have a situation where you had an outage at the end of the month, and then as soon as you get to the first of the next month, it all resets. If you have another outage like the next day, technically you're still doing okay. Maybe you have error budget that will support having an outage once a month, but it's like back to back, and your users are going to notice that in a different way. So that's kind of why we were using a rolling window system. Looking at 28 days, that more aligns with our iterations. So let's say I'm doing an iteration, every week or every 2 weeks. 28 days just hits the spot where we're going through 4 iterations or 2 iterations, and we're better able to align, like, okay, for iteration planning, this is how things have been going, and we can kind of let the data drive our backlog, which I'll talk about more later in this presentation as well. So kind of bringing back to how did we calculate application availability? First, want to note that our metric was a gauge. So a gauge is pretty much sending a 0 for a failure or a 1 for a success every time it pulls a metric. So I'm thinking, okay, if I want to measure my total successes in a window of time, that's just the sum of all of the values that are being sent, because it's not going to take into account the zeros. But if I want to look at the total number of runs in a window, that's counting all the values. So I need to register if I'm picking up a 0 as a, in this, in this calculation of my total windows, total runs. So if I look here at runs in window, I'm putting in, okay, I'm doing a count because I want to just know the number of metrics. I'm looking at a 28-day rolling window, and then I'm grabbing my metric. So just probe success from my source, which was Telegraph, for my production environment. With success, like I mentioned, we're doing the sum. So 28-day rolling window, grabbing our probe success metric, and then doing so for Telegraph in our production environment. We just take a ratio to calculate our availability. So success over total runs times 100, and that's essentially percent availability. And we're able to kind of look at that number and then compare it to our SLO. Calculating CF push success was a little different because that metric came through as a counter. So a counter gave us 2 different sorts of metrics, failures or runs. This sort of thing continually increments rather than just sending a 0 or a 1. So let's say for failures, I have 30, then 31, then 32. It's going to like send that metric, and it could reset all the way back to 0. So what we wanted to do was actually kind of take a rate diff. And that's looking at 2 consecutive values. So let's say I send 30 and the next time I send 31. It's only going to register that we had 1 as that change. So one more failure in this case. So just walking through our calculations a little bit. We just grabbed our metric, total runs. And then we wanted to make sure it was for our task CF push in our production environment. And we also grabbed the same thing for total failures. And then we went ahead and applied our 28-day rolling window to our total runs, same thing, 28-day rolling window to our total failures, and did a ratio. So just the fails in a window over our runs in a window, and then took the inverse to grab our CF push success, multiplied that by 100. And again, you get your availability usually in the form of, 99 something. And this might be what the outcome looks like. So all of those queries, actually go back one. This little eye icon shows that you can show in a chart. And at the end of this, we might just have the eye set on for our CF push success. And that's what our chart might look like. So, based on that calculation over the last 28 days, I've had 99.94% availability. Pretty good. Actually, I'll note this one is 7 days, and we just did this as kind of like a temperature check, but this graph here is actually looking at a 28-day rolling window. And we had like the same set of graphs for our application availability. So this brings us to the next section. So kind of just summarizing everything we walked through, talking about basics of SRE, how we set like the boundaries and the definitions of our SLIs and our SLOs, how we get that data, and then how we visualize it. So when you have charts in a dashboard, everything's there, but a really important piece is alerting, because you're not always going to be checking your charts. And let's say something is breaking in the middle of the night, you want to have an alerting system when there's really an incident that you need to be notified about. So that's going to be what the next part of our presentation is going over. So how do we learn on our data? We had a conversation about, okay, we're in a situation where we're meeting our SLO, but what happens if a large outage is occurring? And we actually kind of have visualization of this sort of case where we're having an actual major outage here, but we're still hitting 3 nines. So it kind of brings in a concept of, does static thresholds actually give me, you know, the fine-tune alerting that I need? If I set my threshold too high, like let's say 99.9, I'm going to get alerted maybe for something that's not important. Like it could be a small like dip in availability, and that might be too sensitive. If you set it too low, you're not going to get alerted until you've burned through like a lot of your error budget, and it might be way too close to your SLO for comfort. So we really wanted to figure out, how can I actually be alerted in a way that's useful? So I'm not being alerted on something that's too sensitive, but I'm also not waiting too long. And is there an option different than a static threshold that will let me achieve this? So we changed our strategy to monitoring burn rate. So what is burn rate? In this context, we were looking at error budget burn rate, and that's how quickly am I spending my error budget? So this worked really well for us because, you know, our error budget is how much we have left to go until we hit our SLO. And if we're consuming it really quickly, we're going to hit our SLO way faster than we want to, but we might not be alerted in time. So I'm providing a graph here that kind of shows what the situation might look like. Let's say I have 2 nines for my SLO and I have an outage occurring here. You'll notice that we start to have a downward trend in our availability, but we're not going to get alerted, in this case, on a threshold until we actually hit this line. And that's not great because a good amount of time has passed since our outage occurred. But looking at error budget burn rate, we're seeing like an immediate uptick in, oh wow, we're burning through a lot of error budget. So you might get alerted a lot sooner on this incident. And this would be like a great situation, because if the sooner we're alerted, the sooner we can conserve our error budget, make sure the system being down isn't impacting as many people, and also allows us to be, you know, our most sensitive user. I tend to think of alerting as, I want it to be more sensitive than any user that might notice something being wrong. So that's kind of why we're going through the effort of, you know, how soon can I know when I really need to be involved with a situation or an outage? So I want to dive a little deeper into understanding burn rate and just set up a scenario. So let's say I'm working with a monitoring system and I'm testing CF push against my foundation every 5 minutes. For this situation, I have an SLO of 99%, so 2 nines, and I'm working within my 28-day rolling window. So there's 3 main situations that we can look at. One of them might be, I'm not spending any error budget. This would mean no CF push failures. I have a burn rate of 0. I am at 100% availability, and my SLO is overachieved. Side note, you don't really want to achieve 100% availability. I know that's a little counterintuitive, and I can go into that later if that question comes up, but 100% really means that, you know, we're kind of moving forward on borrowed time. Like, you will have an outage eventually. I don't say eventually, but, you know, you're getting your users used to something that's not sustainable. Like, outages happen. No system is perfect. You know, even our internet isn't 100% available, and you want to build in resiliency. You don't want a system that has become fragile because it is used to being available. You want a system that's resilient because it has seen outages and it has built in systems that can help it withstand outages in the future, but also have the opportunity to introduce change and use some of your error budget. And I'm happy to talk about that more at the end of the presentation if anyone's curious on, you know, why we go ahead and say 100% availability isn't great. Moving on to kind of like our equilibrium situation, this might look like, okay, I have 1 failing CF push out of every 100 over 28 days. And we would have an error budget burn rate of 1. So, you know, we're exactly hitting our 99% availability and we're meeting our SLO. So we're kind of in that sweet spot where we might be, you know, doing chaos engineering or, you know, applying an upgrade and dealing with a minor outage, but it's okay. Like, we're not reaching our SLO and our users are happy. Our third situation might be we're in a bad spot where we're suddenly burning through our error budget in an outage, and we might have our CF push start to intermittently fail. In the case that we suddenly have a spike, we might see, okay, we have a burn rate of 20. This definitely means that we need to triage whatever is going on, because in less than a day and a half, we would go below 99% availability. And I say a day and a half because burn rate of 20 means I'll burn through my error budget in 1/20th of my window. So 1/20th of 20 days would be about a day and a half. So, okay, I've kind of drilled on this is why error budget burn rate is important. So how did we actually implement this? To start out, we just defined the SLO we wanted to achieve, 99, and then found the inverse for our error budget. Due to the fact that our CF push availability and our app availability were different, like our app availability was a gauge and CF push was a counter, we calculated a fail ratio. So the fails in our 28-day window over our runs in our window a little bit differently, just based on doing sums here and then account for our total runs here. And then we did a burn rate calculation. So that's looking at our window fail ratio over our error budget. And then we just provided a moving average of about 15 minutes to kind of smooth over the graph, but it's not really necessary. It just looked nicer, especially when working with a larger window of time. So using our burn rate, what did this actually look like in the context of an outage? So this graph is actually the same time frame from the previous graph I showed that was just looking at availability with a static threshold. And same thing, we had an outage in the afternoon on a Monday, and we saw a large uptick in burn rate for CF push availability, SLO. So this is definitely a situation where we wanted to alert, and we were able to, immediately get alerted and, figure out what's wrong, run a postmortem, and still maintain, availability above our SLO. I just put them side by side for how differently this looks. This is like our exact situation where our burn rate's really high, but we're still well above our SLO. We're at 99.9. We're not going to hit that for a while, and it would absolutely be the case where if we let this thing continue to be broken, a user is eventually going to say something, or we're just going to hit our SLO and suddenly be alerted and have experienced a larger amount of downtime. All right, so this brings me to our next thing. We're going to do a quick demo looking at alerting based on availability and error budget burn rate in real time. So I'm going to switch over to Tanzu Observability. I also want to give a huge thank you to Zach Bergquist, who helped me put this demo together. And I should have mentioned earlier, also Josh Galoni and Zach were my teammates on this project. And they were invaluable with their SRE knowledge and building a system together that helped our client be successful. So big thank you to them. I'll probably thank them again at the end of this presentation. All right, so moving over to our demo, I have a bit going on here, so I'm going to kind of walk through everything we're looking at. I have an application running right now that is sending data to Wavefront. It's pretty much just sending successful metrics. And at this point, we have 0 failures, and we're just saying that, okay, I'm just having 100 runs every second, and I'm tracking that right now as 100% availability because we don't have any failures. I put a line for our SLO here, and then same thing for our burn rate. We're currently running without any failures, so our burn rate is 0. For the purposes of this demo, I set it up pretty much exactly in the timeframes that we would be working for a 28-day interval, but really scaled down because a shorter amount of time to demonstrate this. So pretty much a ratio from 28 days to 1 hour was a factor of like 670 something. But it really worked out for the purposes of being able to test this faster and also demonstrate. So bear with me, but I'm also happy to take questions about this at the end as well. So looking at our availability window, this might look like what our entire rolling window we're tracking for our SLO would be. Our burn rate window was a bit smaller because we wanted to be sensitive to when things changed. So that originally was about 2 hours and then scaled down by that large factor. It brings us to about 10 seconds. I also added a moving average on our burn rate just so it was a little bit easier to visualize, but that's not super important as well, just for purposes of our demo. And then setting our SLO at 99. So we're going to run through what it might look like to change different levels of failure and see how our system reacts and what might trigger sooner for an incident. So I'm just going to run our script to start out, just called demo sh. And really simple. This is just kind of covering up a bunch of API calls to Wavefront, but here we're going to run a fail rate change. And let's say now I want to fail 5% of the time, so 5 out of 100. So it might take a second to load up, but we should start to see, starting to see change in our burn rate. So we're seeing that tick up a little bit. That might need a little bit of time, but we're not seeing much change to our availability, but we're still seeing this uptake in burn rate. So right now we're about a burn rate of 1, so this is still okay. We'd still be able to hit our SLO. We haven't had availability change much yet. It looks kind of dramatic in this screen, but that's just, there's no scale, so it's a bit zoomed in. Should be ticking up a little bit more. And when I ran this previously, it was with less data. So I've had this running for about an hour at just full success. So for the purposes of this demo, might speed things up a little bit and have a higher burn rate. Maybe we go to 15. Notice though that our availability for the past hour still really hasn't been impacted. Yep, now we start to see our burn rate go even higher. So we're hitting around 2 or 3. So this would mean that we're going to start burning through our error budget at 2 or 3 times what we, so we'd start burning through it at 2 or 3 times the rate that would bring us, we'd get to our SLO in 1/2 to 1/3 of the time that we normally would in our kind of range. So let's say in an hour, we would probably burn through it in about half an hour and cross over 99. Let's go ahead and change this a little bit more. Again, we can kind of see still not, dipping past 100 yet. That line looks pretty solid. And honestly, in this case, like even for our client, like if we were hitting at 2 or 3, we'd get a little Slack notification. So these little blips would be noticeable to us. So maybe bump it up to, I went to 15, let's go to 25. Just wait a little bit to see that burn rate go up. There we go. So now we're dipping a little bit below 100, still at 4 nines, which is really great. I remember this is like really scaled down. So if we're looking at like working in real time, our factor of 600 something applies to how much longer we would have to wait before we really start seeing a significant dip in our SLO and our availability tracking. Yep, so it's looking at about last 5 minutes, and here we're seeing it get even higher. So like we'd ran through our error budget in a quarter of the time. In the quarter of our like availability windows. I'm looking for like a really dramatic spike. This is the fun of live demos. You kind of get to experiment in real time. So thank you for bearing with me. All right, so maybe let's bump it up to 40. Error budget's getting even higher. Error budget burn rate's getting even higher. and still not much of a ding on our availability. So definitely something like hitting 9 or 10, we really want to start investigating that. That means we're going to burn through our error budget in like 1/10 of the time we normally would. So before we hit our SLO. So this is definitely something you would want to investigate. And yeah, I think this kind of bringing us to a little more of the end of this demo, really simple, but just showing that, we're not really chipping much at our SLO and our availability at all, but we're really seeing like somewhat dramatic changes in our burn rate, something that would really alert us to something going wrong. So that was kind of really the incentive for us to implement this kind of system. Because we want to know, like, when we start to really start eating at our error budget so that we don't hit our SLO. Still, it's going to take a while to actually get down to 99. So that was kind of, I don't know, I guess the beauty of it, like we're able to have like a really good insight to how is our error budget being consumed so we can fine tune and keep track and really kind of have control over how our system is being impacted. I was hoping to see like a really high spike because I think the wow factor is there when that happens and you don't see as much happening to our availability. So I might change it one more time and then get back to the presentation. A few more seconds here.
The intense watching everything fail and blow up.
I know. It can be fun. I think I enjoy SRE because I get to experiment a little bit, but also like I get to really build in kind of how is my system working and like what do I want to measure and what is important to me. So, I don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night because I have like a burn rate of 1, but like if I suddenly get a burn rate of like 20 and everything's failing, I want to know. So I don't know, I think working with data in this way is really powerful, and like having this sort of transparency and understanding of, okay, I'm experiencing downtime in this way and like things could get bad really fast is, super important. Yeah, so I think we're gonna end the demo here. Like we're still seeing it eat away, but we're not even really close to getting the 2 nines, and we're having a high enough burn rate where we'd want to alert. So I think this hopefully demonstrates everything I was hoping to show. Also happy to answer questions about this at the end. And for now, I'm just going to reset our fail rate back to 0 because I don't want to eat through everything now that we're done with the demo. So I'm gonna pop back over and present again. All right. So yeah, that was just an example of what things might look like when there is an outage happening. We went from 5, 15, 25, 40, 60% of failures, and we're seeing a change in our error budget consumption, but we're not really seeing much a change in our availability to the point where it's impacting our SLO yet. So that's kind of where the power of this kind of calculation comes into play. So yeah, let's say I am experiencing an error budget burn rate of 10. I want to get alerted. For our purposes, my team used PagerDuty, and this alerted us when we really needed to take a look at something. So we didn't even have to, constantly check our dashboards. We got a ping and we went ahead and, looked at what was going on. So we were able to establish different severity levels as well. So error budget burn rate of 2, might just be a Slack webhook. We should probably look into it, but it's not an emergency. Looking at something more severe like 10, definitely want a PagerDuty alert. This means that, I'm probably going to hit my SLO way faster than what is acceptable, and we need to take a look and address this issue, especially before users are impacted. I will say this is like the entire calculation of our error budget burn rate on one line, and that's just the way a condition needs to be formatted. But this is doing essentially the same thing that I showed in the previous slides, but where it was step by step. And this is just one example of what an alert might look like. We've categorized it as severe. We're able to say, okay, we have a situation, and then mark it as resolved as soon as it's addressed. But this allowed us to really prevent an outage for going way longer than it needed to, and provided a lot of value to us as a team that had to be on call. because, outside of work, we only want to be pinged for something that's really critical. And it was kind of great to have a system that, was user-friendly to us and, wasn't pinging us for all sorts of things that weren't actually an outage or critical. So kind of backing away from more of the technical implementation and the demo, I just want to talk a little bit of, what this looked like in practice and kind of like, how did we practice our SRE for monitoring our availability and also doing data-driven work. So I already talked a little bit about how we work with a 28-day rolling window. We monitored our SLAs relative to their availability in our SLO. I already talked a little bit about why we would do that rolling window, because we don't want, that static threshold where we don't have downtime eventually rolling out. So, let's say we're in a situation where we do have our 28-day window and we're doing 8,000 CF pushes, in that window. Let's say we're working in a system with an SLO of 2 nines. We're in a situation where over that 28-day period, to maintain our 99% availability, we can experience up to 80 CF push failures. So we have a little bit of wiggle room. We have a defined situation. We know our SLO and we know the error that we can work with. So in practice, if I'm working and I have that 100% availability over like a long stretch of time, we know, okay, this is a point where I can introduce change. A system that never changes is eventually going to have vulnerabilities. So, if a CVE comes out, we don't want to avoid changing it because we don't want things to break. Like we want to prioritize that CVE and making the change. Or if an upgrade comes out, we don't want to eventually get so out of date that our system is no longer user friendly. So, making these changes are critical to making sure that our platform is user friendly and also secure and just an overall good experience. And we recognize that, failures do happen. So we're able to introduce more work that involves kind of like what I'm saying here, change and innovation, because we can take that risk and we can experiment. And if we do encounter like a large outage, we get alerted, we address it, and we kind of back things off until we have our rolling window set. So we've no longer had that really like large downtime in our window again. So kind of like in summary here, if we're having a lot of availability, let that drive us to take on work that introduces more change and let us build a stronger platform while taking risk. So, bringing it to the next point, let's say I have a major upgrade and I eat through over half of my error budget here. We want to prioritize, conserving what little error budget we might have left within this 28-day window. So we want to take time and let things kind of get back to normal and reaccumulate the failure that we had. So here we go. We reprioritize work. We go through iteration planning and we say we need to keep our platform stable and we need to make sure that we don't have as much downtime for X amount of time before we recoup back our error budget. So this is where we dedicate time to stability and reliability work. And when I was working on the team for Samba Safety, we actually had a ton of stories in our backlog that were focused on looking at, okay, these things will not impact me, will not have downtime, but will still provide value to my platform and to my customer. So that's kind of what I mean by like data-driven work. We're prioritizing based on what we can handle and what keeps our system in a good state and meeting the expectations of our users. So with all of that, I just want to go down to a couple of ending thoughts, just summarizing everything we just discussed. So I really want to drive home that, our goal was to establish a strong SRE practice around measuring availability. There is no specific right way to do it, but I really like the way that we did it here with looking at error budget burn rate. It fit our needs and it really made it so that we were able to deliver a platform that was, useful to our users and also was, almost enjoyable for them to use. Like we were able to guarantee certain amounts of uptime and also, take risk and do work on the platform so that it was resilient and, meeting the expectations of our business stakeholders. Important things, that contributed to being successful is looking at, okay, what do our users need? And I think when someone's establishing an SRE practice, it's really important to be connected to your users and understand like this is what's valuable. This is what I need to pay attention to. You know, it's not always as valuable kind of going into the next part, like having too many metrics or too many alerts. Like you just want to drill down on what allows me to deliver a service that is both valuable to my users and, you know, easy, not necessarily easy, but like doable for me to maintain. And also like, you know, not waking me up like every other night because there's a failure or my alerting is too sensitive. Like you want to have this balance of something that just feels, you know, like holistically like it's meeting everyone's needs, but also is, you know, reliable and resilient. You know, going into our next point, it really helped us, again, like I was saying, to monitor our error budget burn rates. You know, moving away from a static threshold really allows us to have a sense of how are things changing. And if things are changing too fast, let's say eating through my error budget too quickly, I need to address the issue rather than waiting until I'm actually in a danger zone compared to my SLO. And then getting to my last point, working through our work prioritization, you know, looking at, I'm really close to my SLO. I've had a lot of downtime over the last month versus I haven't had a lot of downtime. I can consume my error budget, means that I really can prioritize, like I need to work on keeping my platform reliable and stable for a little bit to weather out the outage I just had, or I have a lot of error budget left over. You know, there's this thing that I really want to figure out how it works and like, what do I need to do to fix it if it goes down? Let's play around with that a little bit. So, you know, I think a great outcome is we're really able to drive our work and focus on our users' needs and as a team work together to continually build a strong system. So yeah, that's kind of the end of my presentation. I have time for questions.
Yeah, there was a question.
Oh, sure.
On your last slide, there was a question, should the developers be involved in these types of things, or is it for DevOps/infra part to handle it?
Yeah, I think it's usually like who is responsible for keeping the service or the system working. If your developers are a user, that's where you interact with them as seeing what they need. But let's say, so like in the entire context of this presentation, I'm talking more from like a DevOps platform engineering perspective, where we're responsible for making sure that the platform's up. And the platform being up means that it can, you know, host their workloads and keep things available. Like, you know, monitoring, like if a load balancer goes out and suddenly like a lot of my traffic is no longer being routed to, you know, where it needs to go, like that's more of my responsibility to fix rather than a developer. So I think those boundaries kind of define, you know, who's setting up the SRE and the monitoring, if that kind of answers that question.
Yeah, I figure like a lot of the time it just kind of depends on like how big is the company? Do they have separate teams that do these individual things, or is it like who is it on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there's, so this was really small scale. So like in this case, the platform engineer was the SRE expert, was the person interacting with the business stakeholders, but I'm sure there's situations where you might have just a team that's just dedicated to the SRE and observability of a platform that a platform engineer might be maintaining. I guess I always default to whatever works, and whatever works for a business or an org is, you know, totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
cool.
just responding as well. Yeah, they're like,
yeah.
it's useful to know as developer, at least on a basic level.
Yeah, definitely.
Have any more questions, Sweet Killer 9, or anyone else who's watching?
Yeah, I guess if there's not any more questions, I do want to give another shout out to my teammates, Zach Berquist and Josh Galoni. They were amazing teammates for working with this client. And I really appreciate their support with like helping build out all of these SRE systems and really bringing a lot of their knowledge to the table. And also to my team, I guess we're called Tanzu Platform Services now, but they're amazing and supportive and do great work with our clients. So I guess another shout out there. Yeah.
Yeah, titles and like group orgs and all that stuff. I just learned that they just keep changing no matter where you are. After some period of time, the chances that something has changed there is very high.
Yep. Yeah. Can't get too comfortable, but it's okay.
Yeah, a few people were late, so they said they're going to go watch the video after I post it to YouTube.
Okay.
But yeah, so the easy way to find it after this is to go to tanzu.tv/tt/62. And once I get that video up, that's where I'll be. Also, you can find, at least for like the next like week or so, it will be also here on Twitch, and I'll try to remember to turn it into highlights so it lives on forever, since there's this awkward thing that I learned about that you can highlight entire videos. So instead of just highlighting a little part, you highlight the whole thing, and now it's only the entire video is there instead of like a week or two, it stays.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for going into this stuff. It's definitely fun, like seeing, like I like the stuff where you like do something and you see something actually happening from it. It's like something instead of just like I don't know, like things where it's just like, oh, this turned green versus, or like it failed, but like what's happening? Like, why is this happening? What are the errors? Like, oh look, I just saw this entire thing and just like spiked or crashed or whatever.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and like doing it on a smaller time scale. I kind of wish I had this demo like a lot sooner to play around with, because we're working with a client. We're not going to simulate, eating up all of my downtime in like half an hour. So it's kind of fun to just play around with it and see like these are the different situations and what I can work with, what I can accept. So yeah. And also, side note, if anyone's at VMware, I was going to mention, if anyone at VMware has questions, you can find me on Slack. I'm happy to talk more about this stuff or share more materials or experiences.
Is there somewhere for people to reach you who aren't at VMware? I don't know if you have a Twitter or anything like that, because I didn't have that.
I like just made a new Twitter, like still setting it up. So if I could send that and that could be posted on the Twitch site, that would work. Like I haven't even like decided on a username. Sorry. I'm not really active on the site, so.
It's okay. I mean, how dare you? I expect everyone to have one.
I mean, I guess
like I used to think Twitter. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, I have a LinkedIn. I could, if I eventually set up my Twitter, I could put it in my LinkedIn bio or something if people want to find me that way.
Yeah, and if you actually want to use it, I can always update the site with it. Yeah, I used to think it was just people talking about what they did during the day and how they like ate bloody blah for breakfast and all that stuff. And I was just like, well, that's dumb. Or I thought it was. They're sorry for people who don't, but like I don't care enough to want to see what someone's eating or what they're doing every minute of the day. It's just not interesting. And then I found out that people used it to talk about tech, and I was like, wait, what? There's this whole other world out there.
Yeah, I've heard it's a great way to like network and like learn about things in the industry. And I guess this is a minor plug that I will be speaking at Spring One soon as well. So I was like, okay, I have to get a Twitter set up. Otherwise, like, how am I going to stay connected with people? So it's incoming. Like, it'll be set up soon. Yeah.
Yeah, again, everyone, spring1.io. It's the first week of September. It's virtual. It's free. Come join. Hopefully next year it will not be virtual, but at least with it being virtual, a lot more people can attend it. Sweet, Colleen, I already registered. Good job. All right, well, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching. And we will hopefully see you at a future time.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for joining.
All right. See ya.
Bye.